This is Gemara Menachos Daf Pei. And today's share has been sponsored as an incredible schos Aliyas Neshama for a very close friend of the Daf. We've been learning together for years, connected with the entire Mishpacha Baruch Hashem. As a schos Aliyas Neshama for Eliazer Moshe ben Sheiма, B'siyata Deshmaya, the incredible Kayach HaTeira should elevate his Neshama, especially on these Dafim of the Yontiv of Pesach, higher and higher, Bigan Eden Shel Maila. The Daf for Erev Yontif. This will be uploaded much before Erev Yontif. However, the Daf for Erev Pesach. So here we go. Says the Mishnah, Ayatasim Beis, the Mishnah on the bottom of the Amid. Vlad Taida Utmurasa. Literally meaning the offspring of a Taida and its Timura. Taida, as we've been learning, is comprised of two elements, one of them being an animal, a shlamim. So if that shlamim, Zachar Nekeva, is designated as a Taida, but then it gives birth before actually being brought as the carbon. So the offspring is the status of a Taida like its mother. So the question is, what about the counterpart? As we know, the Taida is the Shlamim, and together with the Shlamim is what? Is the Menachos, is the Lachmei Taida. And parenthetically, as we're sitting here on an Erev Yontif Daf, we can appreciate that Mizmar L'Saida is not going to be said because of the fact that the carbon Taida is not brought neither on any of the days of Pesach because of the Lachmei Taida, because of the Chametz component that there is. Says the Mishnah, Hefresh Taida Vavda. So one set aside an animal and it was lost. V'hefresh acheres tarteo. In either of these cases, Eina Te'una. In either of these cases, Eina Te'una Lechem, no breads are required. Shene'amar, says the pasuk. V'ikrev al zevach ha'toida. And from there we learn out ha'toida Te'una Lechem. V'loi v'lada, v'loi chilufa, v'loi timurasa. Neither of those three cases, Te'unin Lechem, require the bread. Says the Gemara, Tanu Rabbanon. Says the Gemara, what is the purpose? The pasuk says, Yakriv, it shall be brought as a taida. Minayin, says the Gemara, or you might ask, Lemafresh taidasav avda v'rivish acheres tachteav v'nimsis harishayna. You separated a second and then you subsequently find the original. That what? V'harei shtei. So now you have two karbanos ready to be brought. Minayin, how do you know? She'ezimim she'yirtze yakriv. How do you know you have choice? Whichever you want, you can be rakif. Yachav ulachma ima, and the lechem. I skipped. Minayin she'ezimim she'yirtze yakriv ulachma ima. Tamaleimar ha'toida, says the pasuk, yakriv, the toilet shall be brought. I would think that I would think that the second one also needs lechem. Not only the original shlamim, but the tmurasa also requires lechem. That's the hava. Mina, says the brisa. Tamalaymar yakriven, who says the pasuk, bring it. What does that mean? Echad v'lo shnayim, one, but not two. Echad shiva kasav amiyot. After echad shiva kasav amiyot, we have a riboy and a miyah, minay and the rabbis. How do we know to include minay and the rabbis? I lost my place. Excuse me. Vladais v'chalifais u'temurais v'lehakrava. How do you know to include all of those? Tamalay imal taida. Yachle tunas lechem. Tamalay vehekrav al zevachat taida. Tuna lechem v'lavlad v'lechiluva v'letimrasa tuna lechem. So we see very clearly that Allah that we're talking about, that it itself is brought, but there's no lechem, there's no bread that are brought with it. So says the Gemara, let's go dive a little bit deeper into Salacha. Shalach Rav Chanina, 3 lines to the bottom. B'shez Rav Yechanan. Lo yishana la'achar kapara. This halacha is only after the kapara. The halacha that the extra taida does not have lechem brought with it is only after the bailim got the kapara through the original carbon. Avalafnei kapara, then tu'una lechem. But if it's brought before the kapara is had, then lechem is required. Now, what exactly this means, the Gemara is going to dive in right now to figure out. So says the Gemara, have a bar Rav Amram. On this last detail, the statement of Rav Yechanan, that wa leishana lachay kapara of kapara tuna lechem. Rav Amram was analyzing, was trying to figure out, on what case is the excess taida does Rav Yechanan apply this din? Elim, if you're going to tell me achilifi, if you're going to tell me if this is going on the replacement taida achilifi taidas chayva, so now ilif ne kapara tanina lacher kapara tanina. So what would Rav Yechanan? Rav Yechanan be teaching us? It's pashit, whether it's lefnei kapara, whether it's after kapara. Tanina, we already learned it. So Rav Yechanan is obviously not teaching us that. Ella, rather, as we turn over to Pei Amid Aleph, says the Gemara, you know what's going on over here? Ella Chalife Taida Nidava. We're talking about the Chalipin, the replacement of the Taida. What type of Taida? Not any Taida. The Taidas Nidava, says the Gemara. But wait, if that's true, a little bit of a sun glare over here. If that's true, bein lifnei kabara, bein lacher kabara. So it doesn't fit with Rav Yechanan. Why not? Because then whether it's pre or post kabara, the halacha is if it's an edava, tu'unais lechem. Marbe b'taidaisu. What's the reason regardless it would need a lechem? Because once you designate this second animal as the replacement for the first, and again, remember, this is a taida of a nidava, this is voluntary, so you're adding on. That's what you do by replacing. You're saying, I'm not only going to give this donation, I'm going to give an extra donation. So you give an extra donation, then avada, you're giving extra breads. So says the Gemara, what must the case be? The case must be, that's a little bit better on the glare, Ella avalad taida nidava. We're talking about the offspring of a taidas nedava. So a moment ago we said a taidas nedava. If you go and you bring a chalipin, you lose it, whatever the case is, and you designate a second one, then avada, even the second one, you have to bring the lachmei taida with it. It says the Gemara, this is going to be a case not that you voluntarily designated it, but rather it's the valad that gave birth. Bein lefnei kabara, bein la'acher kabara. So says the Gemara, so then either way, ain't tunas lechem. It should never require lechem. Why? Because maisar to taidu. It's an extra. It's residual. It just came off of the taida. It's the valad. So why would you have to add on breads in any case? So says the Gemara, we're trying to figure out what is the case of Rav Yechanan, that the determining factor whether you bring the lachmei taida with the taida is whether it's lefnei or lachay kapara. Ella avlad taidas chayva. You have a taida that you're obligated to bring, and now you have the vlad of that. So lefnei kapara ta'on lechem, lachay kapara ain't ta'on lechem. Says the Gemara, my kamash lan. What's Rav Amram teaching us? The Kesavar Rav Yechanan, adam iskaper. B'shevach HaKadosh Baruch Hu. See, Rav Yechanan holds that you get a kapara through the carbon that represents a shvach, a benefit that goes live shvach hektish. Havebanami Abaye ki ayavna. So Abaye said similarly that which this statement of Rav Yechanan says that lefnei kapara you bring your lacha kapara you do not, is teaching us this chiddush that adam is chaper b'shvach hektish. Continues the Gemara, Itmar Nami, even though we have two dots over here, this is really a continuation, as the Gemara now brings a raya to Rav Yechanan. Itmar Nami, 10 lines down, Amar Rav Yitzchak bar Yosef, Amar Rav Yechanan, Chilupe Taidas Nidava. Bein lefnei kabar nachal kabar tuna lechem, like we just saw. Marbe b'toidesu. V'lad toidas nendava bein lefnei kabar nachal kabara. Ein tuna lechem. Ma'isa deteidu. Mamish the same two dinim that we just learned. V'lad toidas choiva, which is what we concluded was the case of Rav Yechanan. Lefnei kabar tuna lechem nachal kabara. Ein tuna lechem. A brisa articulating perfectly the exact din of Rav Yechanan said over by Rav Yitzchak Bar Yosef in the name of Rav Yechanan. Continues the Gemara, Amar Shmuel. About 13 lines down, the first line is Kol. Kol shebechatos mesa. In a case of a chatos, if there is a case of chatos, that the halacha is the animal is left to die, b'taida, then in a corresponding case of a taida, ein te'unais lechem. Kol shebechatos uraya. Any case that the chata says you let it graze till it gets a mum, then b'taida tu'na lechem. Says Shmuel such a statement. Says the Gemara, Masav Rav Amram. Let's try to understand this din of Shmuel. 1 second, we just lost our video. Masav Rav Amram. Ma'u oimer hatoida yakriv. Asks Rav Amram, what does the pasuk mean if he brings it as a taida? Minayin, you might ask, Hari Shaina, you separate the second one, you find the first one. They're both fit for the carbon. Minayin, Jason, and shares the yakra, and you bring whichever one you want. And the bread with it, tamalai maratay the yakrif. Yachal teishniya tuna lechem. You think maybe the second one also requires lechem. Tamalai yakrivenu echav loshnaim. That's when it comes to the taita, the ilu gavi chatos, and of course this is going to be the kasha on Shmuel, that Shmuel said that the chatos and the taita corresponds, and we see over here in this brisa that with regard to chatos the din changes. Ilu gavi chatos ki agavna. What's the halacha? Roye. Such a case, you're going to let it graze. Ditnan. Ivrish chatasai. Vavda ivrish charis tachtav. In names of the Rishon, you find the first one. A case that we've had so many times. V'arei shteimim this mischaper. Yeah, so they have two chatayis. They can be brought as a carbon. Mischaber b'achas mehem. One of them is your carbon. Vashni on the second, what do you do with it? Thomas, you let it die. Divrei Rabbi v'chacham ma'imrim. No. Ein chatos mesa. We don't let a chatos left to die. Elishim says la'achar shenischapru bailim. The only time we let it die unless it's found after the kapara. Ha koidem kapara shenischapru bailim. The halacha is yes. What do we see? We see that the halachas of the chatos and the shlamim do not, chatos and the taita, do not correspond to each other. Says the Gemara, what's your kashi? Kashi is from the Chachamim. Okay, so Shmuel, Rabbi's really Shmuel is like Rabbi Damara Vuda b'Shasaf Rasha Mesa. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Mishkachsa. Okay, so you tell me Shmuel holds like Rabbi. So what's the case that Rabbi is of the opinion that says you let it graze until it gets a mum? 15 lines to the bottom. First one line is Kid Rabbi Yeshaya. Dam Rabbi Yeshaya. If two chatoyis are designated la'achrayis as a guarantee that if you lose one, you have a second. Mischaber beis and shears, you get a gabar with everyone you want. Vashni tir, and the second one is left to grace. Frak to Gemara. Okay, so that's the case that according to Rabbi, the chatos is going to be left to grace. But frakti Gemara v'agabi taida, but the garden to taida ki agavna. In such a scenario, ain't tunas lechem. And we said the two should correspond to each other. Ela Shmuel Rabbi Shimon. So you're right. Shmuel's not holding like the Chachamim. Shmuel's not holding like Rabbi. Shmuel's gonna hold like Rav Shimon. Damar chamesh chatois mesois. 5 chatois says Rav Shimon are left to die. V'araya Rav Shimon Leslie Klal. Rav Shimon doesn't hold of Raya at all, and it seems that Shmuel does have a case that hold of Raya. Says the Gemara, you're right. Shmuel nami chadek kamar kol shem chatas meisa b'taida Ein Te'una Lechem. We have to redefine what Shmuel meant. And then Micah Mashlon, what's the Chiddush? Lafuke, 7 lines to the bottom, with Rav Yechanan. He's mamish arguing on Rav Yechanan. Ta'amar Adam Yisrael B'Shvach Hektish, Kamash Malah, and Shmuel comes along to lie, and he's going like the Shita of Rabbi Shimon. So Amar Rav Abba Nudin, Zu Taida v'Zu Lachma, 4 lines on the bottom. Someone says this is a Taida and this is its bread. Avad HaLechem. Maybe Lechem Acher. If the bread is lost, he brings another bread to accompany the original Taida. Of the Taida. If the Taida is lost, Inoi, maybe Taida Acheres. My Taima, what's the reason? Lechem Liglal Taida. The reason is because the lechem is brought biglal as a secondary, as an add-on to the taida. But the taida, the shlamim, is not liglal lechem. V'amar Rav Anayadin on the last line, Hiver Shema is the taida. Someone designated money for his taida. As we turn over to Peyamid Beis, Unit Yisrael, and there's leftover money. Maybe bahen lachem. Then the halacha is he brings bread with it. Lelachmei taiva, lelachmei. I don't know what happened to the highlighting. Okay, hopefully it will jump back on in a moment. Lelachmei taida, very nice. No, where did the page go? Vini taisra. Maybe bahen lachmei taida vini taisra. But if he designated money for the taida and there was money left over, ain't maybe bahen taida. My time, what's the reason? What's the reason that the original money is brought for these breads? How do you know the lachlei taida shenikru taida shenemar v'ikra bal zebach taida chalos matzos? But if this is the reason, ibchanami frak Gemara, so we should say fakert as well. Lechem ekri taida taida lechri lechem. So says the ibchanami. That's the kasha, that the money for the bread should also be allowed to be brought to carbon, and we know that's not true. Responds the Gemara, lechem ekri taida taida lechri lechem. It only goes one way. V'amarava continues the Gemara. Hiversh taida asav avda. If he designates a taida and it was lost, v'chazar v'hiversh acheres tachta, and he then designates another animal in its place. Then it's lost. They have multiple animals sitting there. So you have 3 potential animals as he kept on designating a new one, and now you found all the old ones. A little bit of a, I guess we'll call them a shlamazel. But Tachlis is you have all the animals standing here. If you get a kapara with the first one, then what? And the second one does not require bread, but the third one does. So 3 different cases of the Tanakama. Then none of them shteimin and tuna is lechem. Why not, says Abaye? Why, says Abaye, do I disagree? Because kulu chalipin dadadinenu, says Abaye, they're all considered replacements, one of the other, and therefore, once you get a kabara with one of them, the other ones are exempt, and there's no din of lechem on the other ones. Amar Rav Zera, says Rav Zera, I'm going to tell you a very similar, almost identical parallel din. V'chein le'inyin chatos. Similarly, by a chatas, that we said by the Taida. Hiver shechatas v'avda v'vishacheres tachta v'avda v'vishacheres tachta v'nim zori shaynais harish shleish tanam amdais. Sound very familiar. Nischaber shayna shniya tam shlish is tireh. Nischaber shlish is shniya tam zori shayna tireh. Nischaber v'em zayish teim yamusu shitas tanikama Abaye Amar. Says Abaye, I feel in his chaper, bachas miyam shtein yamos. Why, says Abaye? Because kul chalipin ta'adadinenu calls consider chalipin of the original. So says the Gemara, okay, this is mamish the same thing. So my v'chein, why are you telling me the same halacha says 2 times. Seemingly the secondary halacha or deira by the chatas is mamish the exact same thing as the taida. Says the Gemara, I'll tell you why. By the taida there's a svara, there's no problem bringing extras. And that's why Rav Zera says, it indeed parallels the case of the taida. Tani Rav Chia, Zakta Rav Chia, one more brisa. Taidish and his Arif Timurasa, a similar case what we're talking about. But now we have that the taida comes mixed up with its exchange. Umeisa achzmem, and one of them dies. Chaver ta'in lo takana, the other one has no takana. Hechi navid, what should he do? Nakav lechem ba'da, bring lechem with him, tamu tumurahi. How can he bring lechem? Maybe this is a tumura, lo nakav lechem ba'da, tamu taidis, you're stuck with an impossible situation. So says the Gemara, hechi dami. Idamar alai, if he said by this taida it is upon me, lo isagyad lo ma'isle behema achrina. So I don't have to bring another behema, because this animal is a lie. Velechem lo isagyad, excuse me, to lo ma'isle behema achrina velechem. Velema, let him say, meaning bring a new animal, bring a new bread, and say as following: if the first was the tumura, ha taida v'yila lachma, hiachli kaima taida v'yila lachma ha tavi achrayis. So says, I don't understand, why can't he just stipulate based on the potentials that this was the tumura? Responds the Gemara lo shricha damar harei zu, and that's the reason why there is no replacement, because he said harei zu. We're going to stop over here. The Gemara is going to go into a bunch of kashas based off of the simin. Pick it up from here. B'siyata dishmaya.